On behalf of the Niyogi Books, I take great pleasure in joining Twinkle of JLF in welcoming all of you to this book release function. Uh, I welcome our chief guest, John Keay, who is a renowned historian, and I also welcome the author Rima Hooja on stage. They will be talking to you about the book, and they will give some readings also from the book. On behalf of the Niyogi Books, I would also only like to share with you that as a publisher, we are always fascinated by Rajasthan. As you know, this book is Rajasthani Tales Retold, but we have brought out, I think it is a ninth or 10th volume from Rajasthan. We have brought out a book on Shekhawati painting, we have done a book on Jaipur textile, we have done a book on Jaipur quilts, we have done a book on arms and armors of Jaipur court, we have done a book on paintings in the Jaipur court, and we have done a book on Chittagong fort, and many such books are there. And this adds to our tally of Rajasthan books. Just now, Twinkle has told you about Rajasthan. That the aura and the flavor and the color and the history of Rajasthan always fascinates us. This book is a collection of stories, tales retold from history, legend, myth, folk tales, all combined together, and retold from the point of view of a historian and a sociologist, as Rima Hooja is. As a result, you can read the book both for pleasure and for profit. We have curated the book with all love and care, and I would hope that you will also give the book the same respect by visiting the bookstall, buying it, getting it signed by the author, and all. With these words, I would like to welcome John Keay and request him to do the honor of releasing the book.
I've never launched someone else's book before, and I'm never quite sure what the form for a book launch should be. But this is a book unveiling. We're not going to launch it into the waters. We're going to unveil it for the author. Here you are. Yeah. Is that something? Okay. Shall I do this from the podium? Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear? Yes? Can you hear me right? I live in Scotland, and it's always said that there are great similarities between the clans of Scotland and the kinship groups of Rajasthan, and I'm sure this is true. I actually live in the Highlands, which is the clan area, and I live in a house that was built originally as a shooting lodge, and so it has, or had, a gun room, a long thin room down one side of it. And that is now my study. And the whole room is lined with bookshelves and books. And I think I can confidently say that the largest, fattest book in the whole of my library is by Rima Hooja. It's a history of Rajasthan. William Dalrymple was describing it as a door stopper. I'd say it was a door blocker. It's so fat. And so I was a bit nervous when she said, will you come and launch my new book? Because I thought, is this going to be another one? How am I going to get this thing home? Well, fortunately, this is quite a slim volume, and it's also much more penetrable, much more accessible. It's a collection of 9 stories based on the history of Rajasthan, on myths, and the stories are about love and war and honor and faith and loyalty and bravery. And I'm always so much in favor of people who can render history in a form that is popular, which appeals to a wide audience. Because that's actually what we remember of history. It isn't all those dates and kings. It's what we imbibed probably at an early age, and usually not as a serious work of history, but maybe, I mean, if you ask someone about English history, they always quote from 1066 and all that. Or if you ask them about whether they're going to be an archaeologist, and they say, yes, they want to be an archaeologist, not because they want to be like Schliemann, but because they want to be like Indiana Jones. So this popularizing of history and making it more accessible is absolutely essential to our understanding and appreciation of more serious academic history. And so any contribution, whether it be in the form of fiction or of cartoons or a film and so on, is to be welcomed by serious historians, and I certainly do. The other thing I really liked about this book is it's dedicated to the memory of Rima's brother, Rakesh, who has sadly died. He was, I think I can say, not just a gentleman, but probably the gentlest man I ever met. A charming and very erudite friend and companion. And so I'm delighted to be launching the book because of that as well. Some of the stories are that in the book are what Rima's worked on the original history, and some are more straight mythology. To many people, Rajasthan, or to many English readers anyway, Rajasthan is somewhat defined in terms of its history and its mythology. The first great antiquarian, I suppose you call him, a scholar who came to Rajasthan and started recording the myths and legends of the Rajput clans, was a man called Colonel James Todd in the 1820s and 30s. And he also is a man for big books. And he produced two large volumes, one called The Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, I think, and was it?
Travels through Western.
And the other one was called Travels in Western India, exactly. But they're both complementary, and they're not that dissimilar, but they cover different parts of Rajasthan. And Todd's material was derived almost entirely from long interviews, if you like, or conversations with clan bards, clan storytellers. And so the first impression that a lot of foreigners had of Rajasthan was that it was this land of kind of medieval chivalry and honor and of struggles between different clans. And that shaped the whole of the history of Rajasthan even to this day, because Todd had approached it in this particular way and had amassed this material. And in a few minutes I'm going to ask Rima to read one of the stories in her book, maybe bits from one or two others, but the story I was chosen particularly is called A Tiger's Tale. And this was actually one of the tales that was originally, that in the 1820s was told to Todd, I think, by the bard of Mewar, Udaipur, and his obviously it dates back even further, but it's set within a historical context, like all the other stories, and in a reliable historical context, like all the other stories in the book. And like them, also, it's followed by a kind of contextualizing of the actual history. So these stories have a much greater kind of approach to reality than a lot of what passes for folklore. So I think that's probably enough from me. I will ask Rima at the end of the session to sign my copy of the book, and I hope you've all got copies for her to sign too. Meantime, I'm going to hand over to Rima and ask her to read and to talk about Rajasthani stories retold. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think they wired us up so well, I'm not going to risk getting up for now. Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for what you said for Rakesh. And this is, I think, enough of whetting everyone's appetite by way of what I'm going to say. I will read, I'll see if I can do all of the one he wanted, which is Narasimha, A Tiger's Tale. Or maybe not a full. The tiger was a full-grown male. It stood in the arena, swishing its tail, snarling from time to time, uncertain and confused, yet still standing its ground in a strange, unknown place. There was noise enough in that amphitheatre of Agra fort to disconcert anyone, thought Raja Dwarkadas Shekhawat, the chief of Khandela. Scores of courtiers and nobles and their attendants were present. The curtained-off pavilion for the women of the imperial household and their servitors, the Zanana pavilion that was set to one side of the emperor's, was fuller than it had been on several past occasions. Even the emperor's grandmother was present. It was said she thoroughly disapproved of the proposed competition. One rumor had stated, I think the sound is going. One rumor had stated that she would ask the emperor to stop the fight, until one of her Rajput granddaughter-in-laws had explained that her intercession for mercy would be humiliating for any warrior, Rajput or other. Another rumor said that the emperor's grandmother had declared she would sit with her dagger and a bow and arrow beside her, and that if she felt intervention was necessary, she would use either or both at will. Dwarkadas wondered if the rumors were true. He had heard that the Dowager Grand Empress was a formidable lady and capable of anything. Various other people were busy with assorted tasks, some putting the final touches to the emperor's canopied seating, others moving briskly on errands directions to their minions, yet others adjusting ropes and banners or setting out goblets of sweet pomegranate juice or giving instruction across the length of the stone-built exercise ground beneath their feet. I'm jumping a little. The noise and buzz was echoed in the marketplaces and water kiosks of Mughal Agra, where excited groups gathered in small clusters to gossip or wonder at what had been planned. The sun was already high, and the coolness of the morning was giving way to the pre-noon autumn sun in the riverside imperial capital of Agra, before the heralds began the lengthy procedures of proclaiming the emperor's arrival. He came on horseback with a falcon on his wrist. As he took his place, the emperor cast his look approvingly around the open-air assembly. It seemed that the spectacle he had come to attend had attracted more people than the elephant fight arranged a couple of weeks earlier. One of the courtiers asked the emperor's permission to start the proceedings. At the Emperor's Ascent, he turned and signaled to the group waiting beside the pavilion of the Rajput chiefs from the desert reaches to the northwest. Raja Dwarkadas squared his shoulders and with an expressionless face walked to the emperor's seat to offer the ceremonial salute. He passed some of his supporters as he walked, including one of his son-in-laws. He said no word in passing to them, nor did they. And like him, their expressions too were impassive. The emperor was all affability. Possibly he was one of the few who did not feel the palpable tension in the air. Dwarkadas doubted that. The emperor was shrewd and quick at gauging every possible situation at a glance. He had been trained in that. Come now, Raja Dwarkadas of Khandela, my invaluable mansab holder and a true Shekhawat, the emperor greeted him warmly. We have arranged for you to wrestle a tiger barehanded. We were amazed when we were told that you had boasted you can do this. It is indeed a brave and foolhardy thing to volunteer to do. But since that is your declared wish, we must admit it is a spectacle we would like to see. Go forth then, grandson of the renowned Raisal Darbari. There is the tiger waiting in the arena. Newly captured, I hear. Is there anything you would like to say before you confront him in the ring? The Raja shook his head. No, Your Majesty. There is nothing I wish to say. He made the customary salute and walked backward a few steps so that he did not commit the impropriety of showing his back to the emperor. Of course there is, his mind screamed at him silently. He had wanted to shout out that to the emperor too, but that would not have been seemly, of course. This way was best. As Dwarkadas returned to his place and his attendants helped him off with his sashes and shoes, other recruitments and jewels, he still wanted to shout out that he had never boasted that he could wrestle tigers barehanded. I do not even wish to wrestle a goat, whether the goat or I be armed or barehanded, let alone wrestle a wild tiger, he thought. He had wanted to ask if the emperor could not tell conspiracies within his own court. Could his majesty not see that this canard of lies concerning the alleged boast sprang from a coterie of some of his rivals? Dwarkadas said none of this aloud, of course. He could feel the frisson of fear in his youngest attendant. His fingers touched the jeweled headpiece of his turban, and he pressed that into the hands of the attendant holding his doffed turban. Words were not required. The jewel and his turban would be taken to Khandela afterwards, along with news of what had transpired here. The news of the so-called challenge was already spreading rapidly through the length and breadth of the Mughal Empire. Just what keeps our foolhardy reputation alive, thought the Khandela chief wryly. He needed to keep a sense of humor to prevent himself taking any step that would earn the unwarranted badge of cowardice for his fellow clanspeople. Dwarkadas once again squared his shoulders. He was bare-chested now. He nodded to one of his other servitors, who carried forward an enormous silver platter on which were placed the paraphernalia for worship. Maybe you could use the platter as a quoit or discus and cut off the tiger's head, his childhood friend had quipped jokingly on the previous evening, when Dwarkadas had announced his plans for confronting the tiger the following day. The friend had deliberately made light of the forthcoming event, as it all about Dwarkadas, including that protagonist himself. At least you have all helped me keep my self-respect, my friends, thought the second Raja of Khandela. He took up the platter and walked with quick, decisive steps towards the gate leading towards the arena. The tiger was still swishing its tail and snarling from time to time. The court was slowly realizing that something different to a wrestling match could be in store for them. There had been an audible intake of collective breath from the Zanana pavilion. The Khandela Raja's intent seemed clear enough to them, at least. The male courtiers were looking covertly at each other, waiting to see if the emperor would make any sort of move. The emperor did not. It was no secret that he was a friend and patron of Dwarkadas, but this was something that went beyond any of that, it seemed. What is he doing? The Dowager Grand Empress's voice was audible to many of the men standing within earshot of the women's pavilion. Dwarkadas ji is a devotee of the god Vishnu, especially of the Narsimha incarnation, was a soft, low response to her question. It looks like he is intending to worship the tiger. There was awe in the voice that explained this in the women's pavilion. That indeed, as it rapidly became apparent to all, was the Raja's intention. He had reached the entrance level to the arena by now, and with a brief order to the gatekeepers, entered within and heard the gate slam shut behind him. He still carried the large platter with various articles of worship. The tiger crouched lower and snarled yet again as Dwarkadas walked towards it with deliberate steps. He began reciting his daily liturgy of worship as he walked. The tiger roared a few times and backed away. But when Dwarkadas did not falter in his steps, the tiger suddenly and inexplicably sat down sideways. The courtiers were silent now, watching with near mesmerized eyes the lit oil lamp on the platter. Many could hear the low rumble of the Shekhawat's voice as he proceeded to offer worship to the tiger, as if the tiger was indeed Lord Vishnu's incarnation of Narsimha. What they were seeing seemed unbelievable. Dwarka's rivals, who had instigated the situation that had led to the Khandela Raja confronting the wild tiger, were looking uneasily at each other. Was this a miracle in the making? The Hindu women in the Zanana had no such doubts. Some of them had closed their eyes and began reciting the name of Vishnu to themselves soundlessly. Dwarkadas was almost in a religious trance himself. Without a thought for himself, he now moved right up to the massive head of the tiger and placed the marks of worship on the tiger's forehead before prostrating himself before the tiger. Moments went by, and still Dwarkadas remained prostrate before the tiger. Finally, the tiger put out a paw and lightly placed it on Dwarkadas's shoulder. It was a light touch, but it brought Dwarkadas back to a sense of where he was. He sat up and placed himself in the cross-legged position before the tiger. This time, he began to sing one of the religious songs of praise he had learned as a child. Some of the others amongst the courtiers joined him in soft voices. The tiger also sat up and proceeded to lick the face of Dwarkadas as if bestowing his blessings. Time stood still.
I was wondering, as perhaps Jaipur's greatest cat patron, that story had particularly appealed to you. And also, I was wondering when you first heard or read it.
I think it would be Todd to blame or to credit for that story when I read it. But I have asked several people, including people descended from Dwarkadas Khandela, the second Raja of Khandela, and they have all heard the tale. So somewhere it is there. I'm not even sure which emperor, because the Charans and Bhatts do talk about these things. I'm not even sure which emperor it was. I would think it happened in the time of Jahangir, in which case because he lived for a very short time afterwards. What I have done in this book for those interested in history is put a little note at the end of the story so that the rest of you can read the story and maybe get hooked onto history.
Yes, good. And Dwarkadas was definitely a historical figure.
It was historical.
Yeah, good. Are you going to read us an extract from one or two that you've chosen?
Which one did you want?
No, they're signaling time.
I'm not sure how we are for time. Would you want a question or? Okay, there's a signal from there. Okay. I might just read. I have things marked. Let's not do that. Let me just read a few. This is Jaswant Singh of Marwar and the Rani Hadiji. The fort atop the high peak loomed large in the distance. It was a beacon to the tired returning army. Jodhpur, at long last. Seeing it, the Maharaja's exhausted standard bearers had lofted their flags a little higher. The kettle drummers had put tired hands to work on their nagaras with renewed vigor, and stumbling feet had picked up the pace, even as outrider heralds squared their shoulders and rode out ahead of the main army to announce their return. This is happening at the battle after which Aurangzeb becomes Emperor of India, and Jaswant Singh has fought on behalf of Shah Jahan's imperial forces and is coming home defeated. We get to the scene where the gates, as our army approaches, they see Jodhpur in the distance, they come nearer. Mehrangarh fort stood, evening shadows had begun to creep across the desert landscape. They had marched longer than was suitable that day. Anyway, the gates of the fort were barred still, even though the outriders had ridden ahead several hours earlier to announce the Maharaja's impending arrival. There was a frown on Maharaja Jaswant Singh's forehead as he saw this, and the frown was repeated in the faces of his entourage as they rode up the steep ramp towards the fortress gate. "What's the matter?" he snapped at one of the outriders as that unfortunate herald brought his horse up to the Maharaja. I'll cut through a few pages. The gates are not being opened. And then a woman asks who he is. So again, they recite his things. And after that, he says, who are you calling an impostor? Tell the queen, Rani Hadiji of the Hada clan, that her husband has returned home and demands that the gates of his fort be opened immediately. He had placed the woman's voice by now. That final quavering sir had given his identity away. She was one of the older personal servitors of his mother and had sometimes served food in his golden platter when he was still a prince. He could not understand why she had joined in whatever was behind this insubordination at the gate. The reply, when it came this time, shook him off his guard totally. It was a reply in a different woman's voice. The voice matched his in its icy intonation and carried with it a degree of scorn and scorching anger. It was a voice he knew well, but never with the scathing condemnation that it carried now. The Maharaja, my husband, is known by all to be an exceptionally brave warrior of a distinguished family lineage and a glorious clan. His clan is famed as the Ranbaka Rathore, Rathores gallant and valorous in battle. His own heroism has earned him fame and renown. Neither he nor the men who fight alongside him, whether they are of noble blood or otherwise, are capable of running away from a battlefield like a coward. I had reports that when the nobles assembled before the Mughal emperor at Agra, only the Marwar ruler dared to accept the challenge of leading the imperial army. Can such a man be capable of running away from battle? Can you, who profess to be their commander, how dare you call out and say you are the same Maharaja of Marwar who is standing outside the gates of Jodhpur fort this evening? I think I will leave it there.
Are there any, we've got a few minutes just for one or two questions or comments. Does anyone want to venture an opinion? I'm always intrigued. I always want to try and relate the Rajput clans to the Scottish clans, and I always think of the Kachwahas of Jaipur as being the Campbells of Rajasthan. But I've never really decided who the McDonalds are. I suppose it's the Mewaris, is it?
I think. Thank you. I think every clan would say they were the ones, but there are some stories which are not of the Rajputs also. Something which came through is, I think the characters took a life of their own. So there is a story of a 15-year-old, and I say this because there are some young faces here, who was already a Maharaja. He was a Rao, and he was fighting a battle. And by then he's realized that battle is not the glory that he was taught when he was a child just doing fighting. And he is then asked by the emperor, Aurangzeb, what do you want? And his reply, and that we know is there, but the reply that has come in the story, I think, is him speaking across time. And he says, if I have to ask for what I want, then I have not earned it. So I will ask for what I think I have a right to do, and that is the right to lead the armies in battle from the front. Now, there are lots of questions of, is a 15-year-old just repeating what has been taught? We can go into it. This man died at the age of 28. His Rani is the one who's built the famous Bundi Rani Ji Ki Bawdi. So there are lots of real things you wonder, they were real people. There's a story of Maharaja Savai Jai Singh when he was 8 and then 11 and then 17, and his teacher. I'm going to leave it at that. If there is time for a question, then it is. Otherwise,
No, I think Jaipur Literary Festival crews are glaring at me because the time is long up. So we shall have to stop here. You have listened to some snippets of history. Buy the book and read the entire history. I would like to thank our chief guest, John Keay, our author, Rima Hooja. I would also like to thank Professor Elgood. He is present here, one of our celebrated authors. Good to see you, sir, here. And I would like to thank all of you for attending this session. Thank you.
I'm asking you also to sign a book.
We wish to thank Nirmal Ji, Rima Hooja, and John Keay for being with us here today. The books are available at the bookstore, which is next to Charbagh behind us. The author will be available to sign her books at the book signing area, which is behind this AV tent to my right side. The next session at Samvad is session 131, Teen Tales, and it begins in 10 minutes.